When working with model data, it is very likely that you will encounter situations where you want to bind a model property to a control property, but both have different format. What do I mean by this? Well, let's do a practical example to make this more understandable. I'm going to create a new page of type content page named converters view. Once I have created the page, let's change the stack layout to horizontal stack layout. Let's cut this pair of properties and assign them to the horizontal stack layout. Then, before the label control, let's create a checkbox control and change the label text to married, to know if a person is married or not. To fill in the information of these controls, I'm going to create a new very simple model. I'm going to create a class in the models folder called data. To this class, we're going to create a property of string type called married. Let's create the corresponding view model for the view. That is to say, in the view models folder, we're going to create a view model called converters view model, following the nomenclature that we have used previously. Let's convert the class to public, and let's suppose that as part of the view model, we are getting the information of a person to know if he is married or not, but this information comes with an already preset format, and for some reason, as part of this information that we are receiving, instead of having a true or false value, we have a text string. I'm going to declare a property that's called data. We need to import the namespace that is needed. Remember to add the namespace that corresponds to your project. And we are going to indicate that the property is called data. We create the get and the corresponding set. We also create the constructor. Once we have done this, we're going to initialize data with a new instance of the data type. And we are also going to initialize the married property. We will assign a string equal to yes. This is what I was referring to earlier. Instead of having a Boolean value to assign if a person is married, the value received would be a yes value or a no value. How could we bind this value to the graphical interface? Well, let's do some tests. And for that, let's go back to the app.xaml.cs file to indicate that we want this page to be the initial page. We're going to go also to the file called converters view, and we're going to indicate that as part of the checkbox control, we want to specify the property is check. And we create a binding to the property data.married. Finally, remember that we have to assign the data context of the page. We're going to indicate binding context equal to, and we create a new instance of converters view model. Remember to import the namespace that is needed. And since we have this ready, let's start the execution of the application to see how it behaves. Once the application has been initialized, notice that we already have the checkbox control, but it does not appear marked according to the value that we obtained from the view model. That is happening because in the model we have a text string that says yes, and on the graphical interface side we have a checkbox that accepts only Boolean values. In these cases, it is convenient to use a value converter which, as its name tells us, allows us to convert a value. That is to say, we're going to have an input data, we process it, and we're going to be able to convert that value into a different output value. Let's create a value converter to help us solve the problem. To do this, I will proceed to create a new folder inside the MVVM folder called converters. Inside the new folder, I will create a new class called boolConverter, a name that will represent the converter very well. We're going to convert the class into a public class, and to create a converter we have to implement an interface called iValueConverter. So I'm going to implement the interface, and with this we create a couple of methods. The first one called convert, which will allow us to convert a value from a data source to the graphical interface, and a method called convertBack, which will allow us to convert a value from a graphical interface control to a model. In this lesson, we will focus on a method called convert to take the input string and convert it into a Boolean value, which is accepted in the checkbox control. The convert method has a signature with multiple parameters that we could use to perform the conversion. In this particular example, we're going to take only the first parameter called value, which is the input value. This parameter is going to take the value that we are binding through the data binding, and it is the one that we must process to return a different value. Right now, as you may well remember, the graphical interface control is getting a text string, so this is the data we have to process. Let's declare a new variable called answer, which is equal to value.toString, since we know that the input value is a text string. Subsequently, let's compare if the value is equal to the string yes, whereupon we will return a true value. Otherwise, let's return a false value. With this simple code, we can now carry out the value conversion. In order not to have problems with the convertBack method, I will return a null value. Now, since we have created the value converter, the next step is to use it as part of a binding in a control. To do this, we need to create a new instance of the value converter as part of the XAML file. Let's go back to the XAML file and create a reference to the value converter, creating a reference to the namespace where the value converter is located. I'm going to write then xmlns colon, let's call it for example converters, which is equal to clr namespace colon. We access the namespace that is part of our project, and we can see the namespace where the converter is located. I will select this namespace, and with this we can already create a reference to the converter through the resources of the content page. Let's create the resources section, and inside let's create a converter reference. Let's assign an X key that is equal to bool converter. We close the label, and with this we already have an instance of the converter. What is needed is that as part of the control where we are establishing the binding, which in this case is the section that I have highlighted, we're going to indicate that as part of the binding we want to use a converter. And as part of the converter, we indicate that we want to use a static resource to access the reference of the value converter. Let's use the X key that we assigned, and with that we are indicating that we want to create a binding, but using a converter that is going to allow us to convert the text string into a Boolean value. We're going to test the application, and this time, once the application is initialized, look how already automatically the checkbox is being selected, which is indicating us that the value converter is working correctly, even when we are assigning to the property a text string.